And welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight for the Cien program on breaking stigmas and celebrating cultural wealth, and really thinking about and unpacking mental health issues and safety in our community. Before we get started tonight, I want to thank our board and our Cien leadership who are tireless advocates and volunteers for this work. They're led with heart. And even when conversations can be potentially dangerous issues of safety, we have courage to stand up and speak with the community. And I really want to appreciate all of the hard work that everyone at Cien has put in for over a decade, longer than a decade. So long. So thank you very much. And I want to thank our panelists who are here tonight with their content expertise, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But first, I want to set a context. I want to welcome you. My name is Socorro Shiels. I sit on the Cien program committee. I'm honored to do so. I also work for the city of Santa Rosa, diversity, inclusion, and equal opportunity employer officer. And it really is about, the position is about how we create a sense of belonging in our organization so we can do that in our community. How do we practice and exercise equity in everything we do so that all members of our community thrive? And that brings us to tonight's discussion. We know that in our area, we have suffered multiple traumas, from our fires to now our floods, everything in between, our drought, our work, man-made traumas, through economic hardship and other issues, that there are many traumas that face our community. What we know as a Latino community is we have a lot of assets already here in our community. We have a strong history of ancestral knowledge, of ancient wisdoms, of indigenous knowledge that follows us and flows through us. And we have many organizations. I want to give some shout outs to Danza Azteca Shantot, Botanical Bus, Raíces Collectives, individuals like Luz Navarrete, who brings her healing where she goes. We have past practices, current practices, experts, and there's still more we need in our community. So knowing that there's a continuum of self-care, there's a full spectrum of services that we need for mental health safety and to be able to thrive and practice care, we have a great lineup tonight. We know from the Portrait of Sonoma that first came out in 2014, that's going to be coming out again, an updated version next month, that there is such thing as a Latino health paradox, that despite some of the economic disparities and social disadvantages that have been created in our communities, that Latinos outlive many white counterparts here in Sonoma County. Much of this comes from protective assets in the culture, the sense of familia that you hear many times about in Cien meetings, that sacred kinship that brings us together. So we want to explore these issues of mental health from a vantage point of assets and things to build on. And what we have tonight are a lot of people who their whole work has been centered on providing supports and services to the Latino community, and doing so from always placing them in the center and creating services and programs that specifically meet the needs, the many needs of the many variations of who the Latino community is here in Sonoma County. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel tonight. I'm going to give you just a brief a brief overview of all four of them, and then each one of them will speak, and then we'll follow with some Q&A. So if you have questions, please post them to Facebook, post them, and we'll curate them and spend time with your questions at the end. So tonight with us, we will have Mar Rivas. She is a student at Santa Rosa High School. She works with Latino service providers and is a promotora, and will share what that means, her experiences and expertise from her youth perspective. We also have with us tonight Nubia Padilla, who is the executive director of Humanidad, a facility and service and therapy that was created to serve the Latino community. She'll share more about that. We also have Dr. Michael Valdivinos, who serves currently on the SRJC board and has a wealth of experience with community and through his licensed psychology and those experiences, which he'll bring to bear about how we make sure we serve the Latino community. And our last speaker, certainly not least, will be Dr. Daniela Dominguez, who will share her experience with her On the Margins program that, again, was built, has in its DNA how we serve the Latino community and how we rise together through the services. And then again, we'll take your questions at the end, and we'll allow our panel to explore and expand on ideas and questions that you have. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to pass the microphone over. We do this on purpose, lift the voices of our youth, share their experiences, and hold us as adults accountable for, once we know better, to do better. Without further ado, Mar.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here on this panel. It means a lot to be here alongside all these amazing panelists and community members. I'd like to start with what I observed and have lived being a part of the Latino community when it comes to mental health. To begin, I'd like to remind us all that mental health services are not just limited to things like therapy. Although that is a service that helps many and is really important, there's many other services that help shape our mental health. With that being said, in my own experience and from what I've learned as I've grown more involved in the community, for Latinos, when it comes to reaching out and trying to pursue westernized mental health services, they're often inaccessible. Focusing on therapy for a little bit, inaccessibility can mean its price. Therapy is so expensive. It can be something like $120 to $160 per hour without insurance in California. And that not only makes it inaccessible to the Latino community, but also just anyone in general. Something that is more specific to Latinos and other BIPOC, though, is language and culture. Our services are often not in our languages, which makes it difficult for elders in our community and people that don't speak English to receive that help. Also, the people that provide these services sometimes just are not able to understand our culture and our practices. An overwhelming majority of therapists are white, and as much as they try to understand us, there's sometimes a disconnect. Not as much anymore, but more during the height of the pandemic when a lot of therapy services were online. Some obstacles with that were having a quiet space to Zoom or call with a therapist, having difficulties with Wi-Fi, or having other responsibilities. For me, I have some firsthand experience with this. I was able to do some therapy sessions over Zoom during the pandemic in early 2021 with the help of Latino service providers. And personally, I experienced each one of these barriers. The Wi-Fi in my room is not very good, so I usually connect to Zooms in the living room, but because I don't have a lot of privacy there, I would connect to Zooms in my parents' room. And it wasn't even that private then, because sometimes my brother would come in or sometimes my parents would need to come in. And so that's something that has really affected me. Now that therapy services are returning to back in person, face to face, now something that can be an obstacle for some people is not being able to make it to sessions due to work, sometimes not having childcare or not having transportation. However, when there is access to these services, continuing with the example of therapy, there's sometimes reluctance to reach out. And that can be because even though there is access, there's not enough knowledge of the services available, or there's stigma surrounding mental health, which within the Latinx community can be shame, it can be ignorance, which that ignorance isn't always on purpose, but sometimes it's due to a lack of knowledge. These are both things that Latino service providers focuses on, which is sharing available services and destigmatizing mental health. Latino service providers' focus is to destigmatize mental health within the Latinx community by building awareness about mental health and wellness. Something that I talked about earlier and that I want to reiterate is that mental health services are not just therapy, even though that was my example. Services that can help with mental health include services related to housing, access to outdoor spaces, and clean air and fire preparedness, all of which are things that the youth promotores under the LSP internship focus on. The youth promotores are separated into different tracks. One of these tracks is the mental health track, or the promotores de salud mental. Of all of the youth promotor tracks, this track more explicitly addresses and increases awareness of mental health issues, like suicide prevention and self-care. They also educate the Latinx community on mental health resources. Another track is the promotores preparados. They work to inform the Latinx community on the importance of emergency preparedness by creating culturally and linguistically appropriate educational materials. They are so important, and it really hits close to home, building resiliency related to fires, because when we're prepared ahead of time, when it's happening in the moment, it's way easier to deal with and it's not as stressful. Another track is the promotores verdes. They provide environmental education and climate science resources to the Latinx community. With environmental and climate change issues becoming such a big issue that affect us physically, not just us physically, but the world around us, it also affects us mentally, because it's a concern that can cause us a lot of stress and anxiety. So it's important that they're educating us, because it relates to mental health. Everything kind of touches back to it. The promotores de vivienda work in partnership with Generation Housing, and they engage the Latinx community in Sonoma County around housing advocacy. Housing is such an important issue because it is so expensive to live here in this county, and that can become a stress that can lead to a mental health issue. Currently, with Latino service providers, I'm a pro promotora. And what that means is that I work in partnership with Latino service providers and a local organization. I work with Sonoma County Regional Parks, and along with another pro promotora, we're working with them to plan a community gathering space. Last year, I was in the track of the promotores de la ciudad, which is similar to the promotores de vivienda, in that we worked with civic engagement and the Santa Rosa's general plan. Over the past year and a half that I've worked with the Latino service providers, the trainings that I've received and the experiences of being a YP, a youth promotora, have let me fully understand the idea of that interconnection between housing, between services like housing and environment's well-being, and how they connect to mental health. A large part of something that helped me connect those two things were going to the pláticas that the other YP tracks were doing. I remember going to the Promotores Verdes plática, where they were talking about issues like redlining and how that affected our physical health, but then also how that physical health could affect our mental health, and everything just kind of clicked. Also, seeing how wide the scope of the work that we did with LSP was really helped bridge that connection. Me also being in that YP internship has opened me to so much knowledge, not just about mental health, but also about other community organizations like Cien, for example, or another one that I've been working with recently, which is Equity and Education Initiative. I've learned so much. Since spring of 2020, I've become much more involved and confident, and I don't know what I'd be doing if I hadn't joined the internship. To finish off, I'd like to remind us all that we can destigmatize mental health by showing that mental health has so many facets that affect it. And what you can do is educate yourself and others using resources like LSP to share what you learned. Thank you.
Clearly, our future is bright. We are so proud to be able to highlight and showcase for our community the strength that lies in our young people and the wisdom and the knowledge, and be able to provide them a microphone to lift that. Next, we're followed by Nubia Padilla, who has spent nearly 2 decades in our community, serving all parts of our community. She finds herself now as Executive Director, again, of Humanidad Therapy. Nubia.
Thank you, Socorro. Thank you, Cien, for inviting me to be here, but mostly because for shining the light in this important topic. Mental health, I will dare to say that we are in a crisis. And I like the fact that you are trying to have another way to see it from the asset point of view. So I want to share a PowerPoint I did for my short presentation. I know this is a long topic, but I will try my best to stay into the time allowed. Let me share this right now. And everybody sees this in my presentation? Can you see it? All of it? Okay, perfect. So let's start this presentation. Start right now. Okay, so let's do this. As Socorro mentioned, I work with Humanidad Therapy and Education Services, and we, besides, and I will talk a little bit how we are trying to support the Latinx community or supporting the Latinx community, but most important, how we see it from the culture point of view. So what I want to start is talking about what are the assets that we have in our community, because when we talk about the Latinx community, we come always talking about what is what we don't have, what is missing, or what is everything, so on and so forth. So first, resilience. And I know when we talk about resilience, individual and the community, sometimes we use that as an excuse not to provide the services or not to pay attention to the community. And it can go either way, but resiliency anyway is something so important for us. And we need to make sure that we use it in an appropriate way. Family involvement, and all of us know how important is the family in the Latinx community, and that is important to recognize and to treasure and to somehow foster that relationships and all of that, because all of that is mental health. The church and religious leaders, places, and all places where people meet and talk and that is important. Community role models. We know that we were looking for that person that really supports us as a community, that really give us this push, and that's very important. Community gatherings, and I can tell you my experience, community gatherings have been so powerful, because when we are together and we start exchanging ideas and talking about that, that's when there is a lot of learning, and I love that. I used to meet with a group of mothers every week, and I still remember that. And so this is important for us to be ready to support them there and to ask good questions and to ask, and then how we can do it together, how we can change things together. And the sense of bienestar, and bienestar is well-being, is this state in what we, based on relationships, community, spirituality, is a holistic concept that is rooted in the community, in the Hispanic or Latinx community. So the next one, oh, wow, okay. The next one is, I want to talk a little bit about Humanidad. And I can talk about the services of how we are working with the community to break the stigma, and I will focus especially in convivencia, although I want to say that Humanidad Therapy and Education Services, our emphasis is in Latinx community, because we understand that it's not enough to speak another language to provide a relevant clinical service. We know that it takes much more than that. So based on that, we have a mentorship training program for MFTs, where our emphasis, as I said before, and I keep saying our know-how, is how to support them to be a very cultural relevant clinicians. And we provide a sliding scale therapy, very low price. Sometimes we even we have people that cannot pay. We don't turn anybody, but the important thing is that we have the therapist understanding that it is not just one conversation, that it sometimes for the person takes long time and sometimes not too long time, but we work with the person, trying to understand what the person needs. So now talking about convivencia. So Humanidad is part of the California Reducing Disparities Project. And what we do in this project is to work with the state and with UC Davis and Loyola University to demonstrate that the convivencia, which I will explain what is that, is a community evidence practice that can be replicated, that is effective for the Latinx community. So what is convivencia? So convivencia provides the participants with an opportunity to overcome stigma associated with mental health, empowers them to share their stories. So they come in a big group. We have two types, but they come, they share their stories, how they feel, how emotionally, how they, what sometimes barriers, what obstacles, so on and so forth. And convivencia offers the space for the participants to share themselves by a method of cultural responsive dialogue. And I will explain what is that. But in other words, we recognize that every person is different, every community, and we take the cultural strengths, we use that as assets, and then we work with that to support the person. And convivencia, as I say, is a cultural norm as value practice that can be adopted as a prevention, and this is important, as a prevention and early intervention treatment approach for the Latinx community in Sonoma County. So let's continue. So what really is convivencia? Convivencia, we have two types of convivencia. The first one is the community convivencia, where we have a large group. They come, we have, as I said before, we use the assets of the culture. We incorporate those elements of the culture into the sessions that we are running. We have food, music before when we didn't have COVID. Now we have it via Zoom, but still we incorporate those elements as much as we can in another way. We partner with some organizations to make sure that their clients participate in convivencia and to understand what needs they have, and so we work together to do that. And then we have, as I said, it's very structured because it's a program that is part of the evaluation at state level. So it's very structured, and then we break in groups and we give people the opportunity to talk. It's a 2-hour, a 2-hour event. Then we have the group convivencia. So sometimes when the person goes to a community convivencia, they decide, yeah, I need more help, and they go to group convivencia, which is a group therapy, still being a therapeutic environment. It's a structure weekly, every week for 8 weeks. Each sessions is 90-minute sessions with 2 bilingual bicultural therapists. So what is this important? It's important because once the person is here, they understand that they are not the only one feeling that way or experiencing these thoughts or experiencing these feelings. And in that way, they feel that it's okay. It's okay. It's a very it's a way to not invasive to come to them and say, you know, everybody goes through these things, and at some point in their lives, it's okay to look for help. So that's what the first part of convivencia. And if you have questions at the end, I can answer questions about that. So for Humanidad, what it means, and I talk about what it means to be culturally responsive. And I want to say that this is so important, and there are 3 pieces that I want to address here. Is first to embrace the person in individuality, and understand their unique needs, respecting the culture and experiences, and tailor the mental health services to address the unique needs to foster the sense of belonging. And I want to talk about sense of belonging. I just, the other day I was talking about sense of belonging, and I can say that one of the biggest problems for a person to experience well-being and to feel that they are capable to do many things is the lack of sense of belonging. And unfortunately, the systems sometimes are not designed to support that, to foster that sense of belonging. The services are not designed to do that. There are many barriers for the person to feel the sense of belonging, from the person that in the street said, go back to your country, to the office when you go and you don't have a person to explain to you why you have to fill the form. So there are many issues around the sense of belonging, and I think this deserves a whole program just to talk about sense of belonging. And there has to be, along with cultural humility, which is so important. Cultural humility is the ability to understand that, or the capacity to understand that we don't know everything about other cultures, but we can ask questions. We can say, I don't know, tell me more. How can I do this? To have this mental, I would say it's an attitude to know that we don't know, but we want to know. We could ask questions, and we can say we don't know. So that's important. I think one of the most important things is to understand that we cannot keep focusing, as I said before, in what is not there, but take what we have and use it to thrive and to have well-being. So how I see us going ahead. One of the advantages that we have is the population growth. So as we grow, institutions and they have to focus more in how to support this population and how to support the well-being, because if they don't do it, it will affect the whole community. It's not just one community that is missing something, it's the whole community. So the services will have somehow to be adapted. Every other design for a program, a system, have to take in consideration this population. And I see this as an opportunity. Increasing diversity, of course, that's an opportunity always. Is not as, on the contrary, as many people think that is a problem, it's always an opportunity. And entrepreneurship, and I like this because sometimes because there is no other opportunities, because the lack of, force many people to be creative, to come out with some way to make a living. And there I have seen many entrepreneurs, many people starting their own business, from the lady that sells tamales to the many restaurants, to the person. That's amazing, that's beautiful, and we need to cultivate that and support that group of people. And culture, I think culture is health. It's culture. It's I can tell you, as an immigrant, sometimes I am here and I see another person that in a place that speak my language, and and then we talk about food. That's healing. That is culture, is health. Workforce. This is something that we need to pay attention right now, because as was saying before, when you go to a therapist and you feel that you don't relate to that person, it's not the same. But we need to support the Latinx community, so we have more people from the Latinx community that want to be therapists, that want to be doctors, that want to be social workers. We need to have state level, local level, some plan in place. And I am telling you, we see that every day. We are still looking for people to come to us, to support us, more therapists. And we see that the workforce development is an area that we need to grow very fast. And civic engagement, and I want to talk about civic engagement right now, because we need to make sure that we have representations everywhere. So as we grow as a population, we need to make sure that we go there and we are there. And I remember Herman Hernandez saying one time that if you are not at a table, you are part of the menu. So yes, that's true. So we need to take every opportunity to influence policy and whatever we need to influence, climate change, whatever it is. And next one, the last one, Socorro, I am almost done. And I want to read this because this is beautiful, is that live with values of resilience, creativity, and inclusion, knowing that we belong, that we are at home, and that we need to build forward with the understanding of what our ancestors sacrificed. So thank you very much. I will answer questions later. I hope I am within the time limit. And that's it for me. Socorro. So
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nubia. Now we'll move on quickly to Dr. Valdivinos to share wisdom with us. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. This is a tough act to follow after, I think, two really, really wonderful and special messages that you've heard already. My message, I'm going to try to keep it a little bit brief here because I'm mindful of time and I'm really anxious to get to some of the questions that we have. But I'm Michael Valdivinos. I'm a board certified clinical psychologist here in Sonoma County, and I'm a trustee on the Santa Rosa Junior College Trust board and serving West County. I think the thing that I really want to mention off the top is I really want to define some terms, because I think sometimes the way in which we use terms like mental health can both add to the mystique of what we're speaking to, but also can lead to stigma and fear and avoidance, which I know runs prominent in our communities. And so when we talk about mental health, and just sort of to back up a little bit, we don't often get enough of these opportunities as a group to be able to dialogue around these issues and for these types of messages to get out and reach a broader part of our community. So when we talk about mental health, I just want to add that what we're referring to is really an umbrella term that captures everything from your daily mood to severe mental distress. And it exists on a continuum, right? This is a spectrum. And I think what's really important to remember about mental health is everyone who's listening and watching to this presentation has experienced some level of mental health in their life. And if you haven't already, consider yourself lucky, because you will at some point. When we talk about mental illness, that's really a clinical term that we're describing, and it's mostly a specific condition. It impacts the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way that we behave, and specifically it impacts the way we think and how we feel emotionally. And it can be really bad and sudden to really long-standing and chronic. And we know that about half the population will experience some form of mental illness at some point in their lives. So it's a big deal. And I think the reason I make intention out of saying that is that we're not alone, right? If you've ever felt this way, you're certainly not alone. And then there's two other terms I want to describe, because I think they really speak to our Latinx community. The other terms that I want to describe that really, in my opinion, fall under the umbrella of how we operate psychologically is a term called mental well-being. I know we've talked about the word well-being has been brought up already a few times today, but the term mental well-being is really a strength-based term, and it describes a sense of emotional and cognitive meaning, thinking, wellness, and it can exist at the same time as mental illness, which is kind of strange. And I think for some people, you might describe them as saying, like, sometimes I feel really good, sometimes I don't. And so this sort of fluctuation. And mental well-being is really fueled by a sense of belonging, connection, and meaning in people's lives, and which you've heard already speaks to some of our culture, because that's such a prominent part of our customs, our culture, our customs and courtesies. The last one is mental fitness. And I think the reason I also wanted to define this term is because so much of what we're talking about tonight, when we talk about mental health, is really as an impetus to try to describe something that we're all sort of trying to reach, I think, right? This sort of enlightenment of what is feeling happy and good. Well, I think expectations are really important to mention before I say this, but mental fitness is sort of a newer evolving term. It's sort of the purposeful practice of mental health. So meditation, spirituality, religion, all of these types of things, right? Exercise can be a form of mental fitness. And it can include, as I just mentioned, mindfulness, physical activity, self-care practices. And it's especially important in times of wellness and in illness. The last thing I wanted to say, because I could just piggyback on everything that has been said already, is that the mental health ecosystem in Sonoma County is interesting, it's unique, but it's not significantly different than a lot of the different mental health ecosystems, not only in the United States, but around the world. Certainly we have much more privilege when it comes to the mental health ecosystem for our own raza, but also more broadly for as a community. But we still face a lot of challenges that folks have already described. The way that healthcare is prioritized in Sonoma County needs to continue to be challenged, and we need to continue to press our elected leaders, work amongst ourselves, and continue to empower folks that you're going to hear from the panel, places, organizations like Humanidad, Latino service providers. We all are I would say relatively comfortable, probably with your knowledge around some of these organizations, but we need to continue to work together because so much of our broader healthcare system still works in silo across this county, which has ramifications and trickle-down effects in terms of how our community receives these services. I think the other thing that I wanted to say is that while I'm really happy to see all the great work that's happening across the Latinx community with regards to mental health services, the quality of care, we need to continue to expect more from each other in terms of the quality of care that we provide for folks in our community, right? And this is really challenging ourselves as healthcare providers, from the administrative staff to the clinical staff to the executive leadership teams of these organizations, really continue to challenge ourselves beyond just getting a certification or getting a license or board certification or saying I've practiced for 10 years. It doesn't, you know what? Continue to refine your practice and get better at what you do because it's what our people expect and it's what they deserve. And I think the last thing I just wanted to say that I hope that as a community, we continue to put people in power at these organizations and the sort of gatekeepers who best represent our communities. Because we can sit here and work as hard as we can to try to climb that mountain and make that strong change, which we should do and will continue to do. But I think that reckoning will come when the top of our these healthcare organizations around the county and those leaders who in many instances are the gatekeepers really reflect the community that we serve. And so I think that's an invitation, and again, also an acknowledgement that I continue to do all the things that have already been described in terms of working from a political level, working from a community grassroots level to try to make that sort of shift. And so again, I just want to be intentional about that call out. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I look forward to questions and comments and concerns, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for also uplifting those issues of power and privilege and how we change existing structures, right? There are plenty of great people, both Rosa and others, and sometimes it's not about the good people, it's about the oppressive systems and how we change those and identify barriers. And our last speaker tonight, thank you, Dr. Dominguez. Please bring us home and we'll follow up with questions and great answers.
Gracias. Buenas noches, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Dr. Valdovino left it right where I just kind of could catch it, right? To thinking about, in quoting, for instance, Mariam Kaba, who is one of my ideological ancestors, amazing prison industrial complex abolitionist. She talks about the dual project of abolition, which involves dismantling current social structures that oppress some of us and that continue to centralize, elevate, and uplift others of us. And so in Sonoma County, we got to start naming how it is that this county centers, advantages, and elevates cisgender, white, wealthy individuals and communities. And once we can name that and be really brave and courageous and underlining that, then we can start having a real conversation about mental health. We're not there yet. And so we got to do a lot of work around the interconnection between diversity, equity, belonging, and mental health. And so my work at On the Margins, I am an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco, and I'm also the founder of On the Margins, is to think about how to be good ancestors, right? So when I think about Layla Saad asks this beautiful question, who are your ideological ancestors, those who are living or those who have transitioned? I often think about that. How is it that I can help others who are around me feel seen, heard, and valued? That is wellness. That is systems of care. Those are systems of community care. And so at our organization, we are a collective of researchers and artists and mental health clinicians who really think about centering those communities that have been forgotten. And we ask ourselves that question of, what is the kind of world that I really want to live in? What is that just and liberated world that I want to be a part of? And the reason why I often work with youth, and I was hearing Mar, and mi piel se puso chinita, right? I was just like, someone give her a full ride, for the love of God. She deserves it. She's such a leader. Is often when I'm thinking about how it is that we can provide mental health services to our communities, I come across a lot of no's. Well, no, because it's too expensive. No, because there's a shortage of bilingual bicultural counselors, or thinking about the production of particular knowledges, right? These Eurocentric approaches of mental health care. And whenever I get a little tired of that, I'm like, who I have to go to youth, because youth have the capacity to radically imagine that just and liberated world that we long for. So the youth that I work with, for instance, Mar is a part of DALE. DALE stands for Development, Advocacy, Leadership, and Engagement, and is this group of 35 amazing youth who are from high school, who are really thinking about these projects of how to make their schools grounds for educational justice. And so they're not saying no, they're saying how, right? And they're demanding of us to support them and to fund them. So I am all about, us tapping into our own empowerment. But how much can we tap into our own empowerment when a lot of the community is seeing us, and I'm saying that as someone who also has a lot of privilege, but seeing communities on the margins of society as disposable, right? So how can we move from becoming disposable to becoming accountable to each other? How could we find our way back to each other? So I would say it starts by centering communities, again, on the margins of society, letting youth lead, letting youth share with us and spreading that radical imagination, challenging ourselves to think about how can we be our most liberated selves, and speaking truth to power. And I realize that sometimes, as people from oppressed communities, it can be really scary, but we have to do it. There's more power in numbers and in love and in care than in wealth. And so I think Sonoma County needs to have a come to Baby J moment and really, talk about how it is that we can move forward by supporting those who are most in need. And there are a lot of people who are doing that. The Healthcare Foundation is, for instance, providing full scholarships for our students at the University of San Francisco, full rides for 3 of our students to become therapists. I know that Latino Service Providers is doing amazing work. I also know that the Sonoma Valley Catalyst Fund recently funded our Healing Justice program, which focuses on, again, systems of care that move beyond the therapy room, because we understand that therapy is not the only thing that's therapeutic. Being in community is therapeutic. And so tapping into our ancestral resources, our ancestral wealth, talking to each other, breaking bread together, praying, using herbs, using plants, just being in deep community, caring for each other is the way to go. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop right here because I know we're short on time and I'm also anxious to get some questions. But again, thank you for giving us this platform and for sharing our ideas. I think I'll just end with, I think it's time for Sonoma County to really freedom dream and for us to freedom dream together and to stop saying, no, it's not possible. You know, we gotta dream big.
I love the way you ended that and the way we think about changing the structures that have caused so much of the trauma to begin with. That if we don't take the structures on, we'll be having to heal forever because there's harm being done in our communities that has to shift and will only come through us. So thank you so much for lifting that. Some questions we have from the audience, and I'm going to ask Ma that we start with you, but it goes to everyone. What are some of these barriers and constraints that keep Latinos from accessing these resources, and how can we remove them? And just as a little follow-up, and you might start here, is there a, or what role does language and race play in these barriers?
So I'm going to speak about the youth experience because I am a youth. For me, I think one of the big barriers for seeking out mental health services starts with our parents. And if our parents, if we feel that our parents aren't going to be supportive, or if they don't know how to support us, I think it's difficult to reach out and start there. With race and language, I want to go back to that point that everyone was making about the sense of belonging. I think that's so important. I did another panel last year with Sonoma County Office of Education, and that one was students talking about our experiences in schools and race and language and how all of that kind of affected us. And something that I remember hearing a lot then was also that sense of belonging, of like, if we don't see teachers that speak our languages, that know our culture, that look like us, then it's kind of it's disheartening. And so having teachers like that kind of creates a sense of belonging. So yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to share things they see about barriers that we can address, overcome, dismantle, knock down? Getting very in my liberation justice moments.
Socorro, I can go and I can say that first barriers can have can accumulate at the point that they produce disparities in quality of healthcare. But the barriers that I see is most of them are unspoken, because when, as Dr. Dominguez said many times, we don't address the things the way they are, because in our culture we are very polite, and we are come from this colonialist mentality that whatever we get is good enough. Mm-hmm. So I would say that one of the barriers that I see is like a ripple effect, is the lack of entitlement. We feel that we are not entitled, that we cannot access, that this is not for us, that this is for other people. So that in that way, we don't use the opportunities that are presented, that sometimes are very few, but because this is not for us. And the same thing, what I have seen at home with the kids, the families, the messages that we send to the kids when we talk to the kid and say, this is not for you, this is other people. College is not for you, college is for, so we are, I think the dynamics at home are setting us for stay behind, and that's something that we need to address with education.
We're kind of winding down. There is a question about convivencia, but before we get to that, I want to make sure everyone kind of is able to give. Dr. Valdivinos, you started with kind of an invitation and a call out for change, and then certainly Dr. Dominguez, you brought that home too, about kind of where change needs to be. When we leave this conversation tonight, what should we be prepared to do?
Oh, I'll jump in. I don't think we have enough time, but I'll keep it brief. Listen, I think Dr. Dominguez just talked about this briefly. I think that at the very least, folks that are listening to this and who might watch this later. Within our own community, we can start this. All of these stories, especially Mara's message a second ago, reminded me of a time when I first left, when I left the high school, not too long ago. But when I left high school and got to the JC, and I was lost. A lot of my friends had transferred on to universities. A lot of my Latino friends were still in Guerneville. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was going to go. I didn't really know anyone. If it hadn't been for Puente and people like Luz Navarrete and Ruben Sandoval and the cohort of OG folks from the JC who, and the message I want to say here is transferred privilege, because that's what it was, right? They said, hey, Mike, here's how you play the game, man. Here's how you do it. Here's how you're going to get to UC Davis. Here's how you're going to get to be a psychologist. Here's how you're going to have to keep pushing. Now, granted, it was on me to do the work, like it will be for Mara and all the other youth that are listening. But I think within our own communities, there's people like all of these panelists who carry this incredible privilege. I see people on the chat right now who have done amazing work in our communities that are Latinx folks, right? Who can be amazing leaders in our community to uplift, support, transfer that privilege to youth so that they don't feel alone, disenfranchised, unmotivated, lost, scared, avoidant, and saying, well, you know what, maybe this is where I deserve to be. Because that's how I felt until I started seeing folks that looked like me, who talked like me, who had been in places like I did, who were quote unquote sort of making their way and who had succeeded and sort of carved their own path. And so a call out would be, you know what, if you're out in this community and you're looking for ways to help, connect with a youth and offer help, right? Reach out to one of these great organizations, volunteer your time if you're a business professional and say, how can I help somebody in the community who might not have that privilege, transfer that privilege, ignite that fuse and push.
Thank you. I love that term, transfer privilege. If you found your way there, it's time to give it away. Dr. Dominguez.
Yeah, relinquish power. I think what's really important to consider is COVID has taught us that our survival is completely connected, right? And just like our survival is connected, our liberation is also connected. We're completely entangled. And so for people who are here, who are white identified, your liberation is tied to my liberation. My liberation is tied to the liberation of trans folks, of queer folks, of disabled folks. And until we start treating each other with love, care, and respect, we're going to continue struggling. So none of us are free until all of us are free. And that's when we'll have true mental health. So let's start disrupting, let's start building a new society that is truly equitable and anti-racist.
Thank you so much. Nubia, there was a question, convivencia. Is that about like breaking stigmas or is that actually group therapy?
Both. So as I said before, we have two types. Community convivencia is just exploration in group, a large group, and then group convivencia is a therapy group. But what we want to do is by sharing stories, by being together, by sharing how we feel and all of that, that persons understand that it's okay, that's fine, that I am in the right place, I am at home. And I want to add something, Socorro, to the question before. If something that we need to do here is to invite every person that has a program that provides services to ask themselves how my program or what I'm doing fosters the sense of belonging of our community. And that will be great.
I want to thank everybody again for joining us. Clearly, as many said, this is a conversation that can go on, and dismantling so many of these systems takes all of us. It is a sense of belonging. As Dr. Dominguez said, none of us are safe till all of us are safe. And that is our responsibility and our moral obligation. So thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for being part of this movement and this change in our community. And thank you for joining us tonight.